Like many children growing up, I had an imaginary friend. In the mid-90s, a few years before I was born, my parents moved into a very nice home in the Midwest boonies. The remote location significantly cheapened the property, and my parents were able to afford it alone off my dad's income. He had developed a now still relatively popular website that was growing fast at the time. The nature of his work didn't require him to leave home, so the remote location was not an issue whatsoever. Because they were so financially secure and my mom no longer needed to work, they decided to have me. That house was admittedly pretty isolating. The neighbors' properties were hundreds of yards away, and most of them were pushing elderly status. All their children were grown and lived their lives somewhere else. Yes, I had friends growing up, but I only saw them at school. I didn't make my first friend until I was in kindergarten, let alone actually stood face to face with another child my age. But because I only saw other children at school, it prompted me to conjure an imaginary friend. I remember naming him Samwise, after the Lord of the Rings character. My parents were huge fans and had read the books to me. They even took me to see it when it first released in theaters. I'm sure other moviegoers were confused as to why a couple had brought their 6-year-old child to see Lord of the Rings, but I loved it. I know this sounds creepy, but to me it wasn't. Samwise and I played in our acres of backyard forest, gathering ancient artifacts, broken glass, and rocks in nearby riverbeds, hunting with bow and arrow forged by the heavens to slay the legendary mythical lion, my late dog Sandy, who enjoyed retrieving the foam sticks, and generally partaking in other grand adventures to embark on together. At first, my parents were supportive toward my imaginary friend phase of life. I'm sure they were aware of the isolation I was feeling and assumed this was a healthy outlet. When they set the table for meals, there would be 4 spots instead of 3. They even went to lengths as far as putting together an extra meal for Samwise to eat. Now that I look back, that may have been why we ate leftovers so often. Either way, their reaction was positive. Sometimes too positive. One time, my parents had set the table for dinner. This time, there were 5 plates of food. I remember asking, "Why are there 5 plates?" "Well, Micah's got to eat too, buddy," my dad responded. I didn't know who Micah was. I had never even heard of the guy. I looked over at the usually empty portion of the table that now contained a plate full of food and silverware. My parents looked at the spot too, making facial expressions as if reacting to someone. "Francis, could you please get Micah some water?" my mom asked. I got up excitedly, knowing they were playing a fun game of pretend with me. I filled 2 glasses of water for Micah and Samwise and brought them over to the table, returning to my seat. My parents began smiling and glancing at me. "Oh yeah, that's Samwise, Francis's friend." I chuckled, filled with joy. I waved toward the new empty seat. "Hi, Micah," I said giddily. "Yes, he is the sweetest," my mom said in reference to me. My parents were amazing at playing along. It felt real, like there really was somebody there. They would small talk with the absent figure and occasionally laugh and nod their head in response to nothing. Then they looked at me for an uneasy period of time. Their expressions became confused. "Francis, be a good boy and talk with our guests," Mom had suggested with a low-key tone that suggested if I didn't, I would get in trouble later. I had felt anxious at the sudden request to socialize with something I couldn't see or hear. I was questioning whether this had turned into some psychological form of punishment to show me how annoying I was with Samwise. But that didn't make sense. My parents liked Samwise. I froze up in the confusion, bouncing my glances between my mom and dad like a tennis match spectator. They both had looks that said, "Well, get on with it." The awkward silence and embarrassment of the moment appeared too much for them. They dropped their attempt at making me communicate with Micah. "I'm sorry, he gets a little shy sometimes." "Francis, why don't you go to your room for tonight?" "Don't forget to bring Samwise. I went to bed feeling guilty and confused. A swirl of emotions pulled at my prepubescent heart. I tried to forget about it and went to sleep, but something woke me up. It was my parents talking and laughing in the dining room. There would be long pauses and equally long responses. They would periodically chuckle in the ominous silence as if they were talking to someone on the phone. Then I heard my dad, "See ya, Micah," and the front door slammed shut. After that day, my dad would tell me he was going out to see Micah. What they did together, I have no idea. Other days, my parents would invite Micah over. Those days, I would sit in my room and listen as they conversated with nothing again. Day after day, night after night. Until one day, I was suddenly awoken from sleep once more. My dad was yelling outside my closed bedroom door. I remember hesitantly calling out to my dad. His response was blaring. "Stay in your room, don't come out." I was scared. I was scared because my dad sounded scared. I had never heard panic in his voice like that. He continued shouting, "Go! Leave!" And like every night Micah came over, his visit ended with a shutting door. Their imaginary friend must have done something bad because the next morning my parents told me he wasn't allowed over anymore. But of course, in the mind of a confused child, I didn't know what to believe. I knew Micah wasn't real because I never sensed his presence. Obviously, if he existed, I would have seen him, heard him, smelled him, you know? Because of this, I bottled it up inside, as my parents' attempt at convincing me that none of us were allowed to have imaginary friends anymore. My parents never spoke of Micah again. They never even acknowledged that he had ever visited our home. Just like I hadn't when I was 6. A recent incident caused me to remember this story, and countless others, but I can share a few that absolutely stood out to me as odd. A few years ago, I went to a theater to see an independently funded film. Because the film was independent and wasn't advertised heavily, only a few theaters had showtimes for it, the closest theater being an hour away. The movie theater lobby was packed, and I was afraid the movie I drove so long to see was sold out. I approached the ticket booth, and nobody was there. In a frantic attempt to obtain some tickets, I searched around the halls of the theater for whoever manned the ticket booth. Outside the numbered theater doors, a theater employee found me first. To my surprise, he introduced himself to me with a tight grip on the shoulder and a question. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said, speaking formally with an accent of anger. "Why? What did I do?" I asked, confused. I thought a prank was being played on me. "You have to buy a ticket to see a movie, dumbass. You've rudely ignored my coworker in the booth. He told me you just walked right past him, and when he told you to stop, you just kept going. So please, exit the theater before we escort you ourselves." He was dead serious. If it was a prank, it was tasteless. As I walked out the theater, I glanced at the ticket booth one more time. Still, nobody was there. Another instance of me being rude, I was checking out at the grocery store. Found an empty line, set my items on the counter, and waited as the cashier rang them up. But the whole time, she gave me annoyed glances. Scoffed at me a few times even. It might have been because I accidentally hit an empty card in the way of the cashier aisle with mine. I was honestly too lazy to move it by hand. The weirdest one was at my own job a few days ago, which prompted this whole finding out what the hell is wrong with me thing. I work at an office call center for IT. A coworker of mine who had worked there since I started stopped showing up one day. Nobody acknowledged it, so I chalked it up to just him quitting or getting fired. Then I saw a photo of him on the accolades wall for Most Efficient Employee of the Month. I thought they were pranking me, and I laughed when I saw it. They asked what I was laughing about, saying that he worked really hard. I thought maybe he passed away and I didn't hear about it, and this was maybe some weird way to commemorate him until I was cornered in my office. Shelley, an older woman, began berating me about this workplace is a family and everyone here is equal, so treat them as such. I had no clue what she was talking about and even considered submitting a complaint to HR. The whole thing seemed so silly to me that I began thinking of this possibly dead coworker as the office's imaginary friend. That thought is what kickstarted my trip down memory lane, conjuring the memory of Mika, my parents' imaginary friend. I realized how weird that whole concept was. They definitely weren't teaching the counter-imaginary friend tactic in any parenting books I had heard of. I found the time after work to call my mom. After a few hours about Mika, she paused for a moment. "I'm surprised you remembered that whole thing," she said, chuckling awkwardly. She continued, "Mika was your dad's old friend from high school. He actually emailed your father congratulating him on his success as a website developer and entrepreneur. That's what sparked their momentary rekindling, I suppose you could say." Her voice grew weary over the cell phone speakers. "Wait, Mika was real?" I asked, profusely puzzled. "Well, of course he was real. But we should have listened or acknowledged your feelings toward him. I mean, when you were a child, you obviously saw something wrong about him we didn't catch." "What do you mean?" I asked again. "Well, honestly, I don't think you liked him very much. You never talked to him, never said hi, never even looked at his direction. He would try to give you a high five, and you would walk right past him. My badass little 6-year-old. That's why we had you tested so young." I asked her to elaborate on that. She mentioned an autism screening, one I had totally forgotten about until our conversation. Because of how I was treating Micah at the time, my mom brought me to a pediatrician in what I now understand was for an autism test. I understood that they asked my mom a lot of questions about my development, which makes sense. I remember taking tests and answering questions. I had thought this was something every kid ends up doing. They found that I was not on the autism spectrum. However, the pediatrician found something else about me. When you are alone in your room and you want to calm down, where do you go in your thoughts? The pediatrician had asked me this after the topic of hiding in my room to avoid uncomfortable situations emerged during the session. "What do you mean?" I remember asking. "Well, when I'm feeling sad, I like to imagine I'm sitting on a paddle boat, slowly drifting on a lake. It's like meditation. Have you heard of that word before?" she asked curiously. "Yeah," I responded. "Okay, Francis, where do you picture yourself when meditating?" "On a mountain with the other cool fighters," I said gleefully. I had heard of the word. It was from a kung fu movie I used to watch. The main character would meditate to become stronger. So, of course, I answered based on that impression. "Can you describe it more for me?" she asked, paying close attention. "Ugh, there's birds up there, I think." "You think?" "Tell me what you see," she said and began writing in her notebook. "A couch, you, your desk, the dog photo that's on your desk." I was very careful to observe my surroundings in the office room. "No, Francis, what do you see in your mind? Close your eyes for me, please. Can you see the mountain with the cool guys? Can you tell me what color their costumes are? Are their costumes stained with dirt from training on the mountain, or are they careful to make sure they're clean?" I had no clue what she was talking about. I could describe what I thought I saw on the television show, but I couldn't see it as she kept repeating. That was the day I discovered I had aphantasia. Essentially, one who has aphantasia cannot utilize visual imagery in their thought processes. The best way to describe it is as such, think of an apple. 1. Can you see the shape of the apple? 2. Can you see the color of the apple? 3. Can you see the texture of the apple, such as indents, scratches, or rough brown skin? Generally, most people can see these to some degree, detailed or not. To me, the apple does not exist. The pediatrician mentioned aphantasia to me and my mom as if it was a party trick, Nothing to be concerned about, just a little quirk I happen to have. During the early 2000s, aphantasia was not something well known or well studied. It just happened to be something she knew about and treated it as if it was no big deal. As the memories of banal waiting rooms and multiple sessions with the pediatrician flooded to the front of my mind from a previously untapped reservoir of thought, my mom broke the news. Your father heard scratching in the middle of the night that woke him up. He thought he left Sandy outside and felt awful about it. So he got up and turned on our bedroom light, which I yelled at him for, but he needed to find his shoes. Anyways, Sandy was sleeping soundly in the corner of our room. So then we thought it was a bear trying to break in through our front door. Your dad grabbed his hunting rifle from our closet and left to check it out. Instead, he saw Mika had broken into our home and was clawing at your bedroom door like a rabid animal. Thank God you were asleep. If you had left your room, I'm sure you would have been traumatized for life. I sure was after that. I heard your father yelling, "Mika, what the hell are you doing here?" I interrupted my mom. Wait, why the fuck was he clawing at my door? I asked, tightening my grip on the phone. Your father and I talked about that later. We couldn't think of any sure reason. But he did mention saying something like, "There is no room for the blind and I can show him more than he sees," while your father was aiming the rifle at him. He said, his face absolutely unmoving like stone the whole time. That man was delusional. After the cops took him, we never heard from him again, thank God. I thanked my mom for telling me what had really happened. She asked if I was really okay, and I told her we could meet soon for dinner. Hopefully she could explain more of what happened to me in person. I'm also posting this because I'm scared. I've started to think of more similar instances, and each time I come to the conclusion that maybe someone was there. Does anyone else have experiences like this? If so, I'd really like to hear them. If you know more about this than I do, please feel free to help me. I'm freaking out.